John Carter stepped into the glossy showroom, his boots still carrying traces of the soil that had made him a millionaire. The space reeked of polished privilege, pristine white floors, sleek jet models displayed like jewels, and staff dressed in sharp suits. Yet their eyes did not light up with excitement at the sight of a potential customer. Instead, they narrowed with suspicion, darting from his well-worn overalls to the check peeking out of his pocket. "Can I help you?" a young, smug receptionist asked, barely looking up from her tablet. "Yes," John replied with a warm smile. "I'm here to see the GX750. I want to buy one." The words hung in the air like an absurd joke. The receptionist blinked, finally looking up. "You mean, you're delivering something for the GX750? Around the back, deliveries are over there." John's smile faltered. "No, I'm not delivering anything. I'm buying it." A stifled laugh escaped from behind the receptionist's desk. John turned to see two salesmen whispering, their eyes locked on him like he was part of some inside joke. One finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "Sir, the GX750 starts at $20 million. Maybe you'd like to look at our brochures instead?" John remained calm, pulling the check from his pocket and setting it on the counter with deliberate care. "This should cover it. Now, do you want to make the sale, or do I need to take my business elsewhere?" The receptionist's jaw dropped, her face a mix of shock and disbelief. But instead of an apology, she called over a security guard. "I think this gentleman might be lost. Can you help him?" The security guard, tall and imposing, approached with a frown. "Sir, I think it's best if you leave." The scene escalated as John tried to explain himself. A small crowd of wealthy customers began to gather, their murmurs growing louder. Some chuckled, amused by the spectacle. John, his patience wearing thin, raised his voice. "You don't think I can afford this jet because of how I look, do you? That's what this is about." Before the guard could respond, a woman in the crowd pulled out her phone, recording everything. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. "He's literally showing them the money, and they're still treating him like a thief." John was eventually escorted out, his check crumpled in his hand and his dignity bruised. The humiliation burned, but he kept his composure, offering the crowd a faint, tight-lipped smile as he left. Later that evening, the video hit social media. The hashtags #BlackFarmerJet and #Racism in Aviation exploded overnight. Comments poured in from every corner of the internet, ranging from outrage to disbelief. "This is America in a nutshell," one user wrote. "A black man can be rich and still be treated like he doesn't belong." John sat in his living room, watching the chaos unfold on his phone. Friends and family called to check on him, their voices tinged with both anger and admiration for how he had handled himself. But John wasn't angry, he was tired. Tired of proving himself, tired of being underestimated, tired of fighting battles that shouldn't exist. He sighed, staring at the screen as notifications pinged relentlessly. Among the flood of messages was a direct invitation from a talk show producer. They wanted to hear his story, to give him a platform to speak out. John leaned back in his chair, the seed of an idea forming in his mind. If they wanted to hear his story, he would tell it, but he wouldn't stop there. The video had spread like wildfire. In less than 24 hours, John Carter's name was trending worldwide, and the footage of his humiliating treatment at the jet dealership had become a lightning rod for discussions about racism and prejudice. News outlets picked up the story, interviewing customers who had witnessed the incident. One bystander described it as blatant discrimination, and another called it a disgraceful reminder of the biases still deeply ingrained in society. Social media was ablaze with outrage. Activists, influencers, and celebrities shared the video, demanding accountability. "This isn't just about one man being mistreated," an activist tweeted. "This is about the everyday racism black professionals face, even when they've earned their place at the table." Hashtags like #AccountabilityNow and #JusticeForJohn filled timelines. At first, John was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of attention. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and had always preferred the quiet satisfaction of working his farm and providing for his family. Yet, the messages of support pouring in from strangers across the globe began to shift something inside him. When his phone buzzed with a call from a major news anchor, John hesitated before picking up. The anchor wasted no time. "Mr. Carter, your story has struck a chord with millions of people. Would you be willing to come on our show and talk about it?" John took a deep breath. "I didn't set out to make a statement," he replied. "But if sharing my story helps even one person understand the problem, I'll do it." The interview aired the following night. John spoke with quiet conviction, recounting the moment he was dismissed and humiliated simply because of how he looked. "I've worked hard for everything I have," he said, his voice steady but firm. "And it shouldn't matter what I'm wearing or the color of my skin. My money spends the same as anyone else's." The audience was captivated, but it was John's humor that truly won them over. When asked about his plans now that the dealership had made national headlines, John chuckled. "Well, I told my wife maybe we should put a milking station in the jet. Daisy, our prize cow, has been asking for first-class treatment." The remark went viral almost instantly. Memes flooded social media, depicting Daisy lounging in plush airplane seats or sipping champagne in a jet cabin. The humor humanized John even further, turning him from a victim into a relatable, endearing figure who refused to let injustice steal his joy. Meanwhile, the jet dealership was in full crisis mode. Executives scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing an official statement apologizing for the misunderstanding and promising an internal review of their staff and policies. But the public wasn't buying it. Comments flooded their social media pages, calling the apology performative and demanding real change. John, however, wasn't interested in their half-hearted mea culpa. When reporters asked if he'd accepted their apology, he replied simply, "Words are easy. Actions are what matter." Behind closed doors, John's friends and family urged him to take advantage of the moment. "You've got a platform now," his best friend Marcus said. "Use it. Make them uncomfortable. Make them change." The dealership's CEO eventually reached out personally, requesting a private meeting to discuss how they could repair the damage. John agreed, but not before deciding he'd set the terms. If they wanted to talk, they'd do it on his farm, surrounded by the very land and livestock that represented his life's work. As the interview clip continued to circulate, people began to rally around John not just as a symbol of injustice but as a beacon of resilience. He wasn't just a black farmer humiliated at a dealership. He was a man standing up for his dignity, with wit and grace, against a system that had underestimated him. Offers started pouring in, speaking engagements, partnerships, and even a proposal for a reality TV show. But John remained grounded. "I'm not doing this for fame," he told one reporter. "I'm doing it because it's time someone did." By the end of the week, John had become a household name, and the conversation had shifted from outrage to action. People weren't just demanding accountability from the dealership. They were asking broader questions about inequality in other industries, too. And through it all, John stayed true to himself, quietly preparing for the next chapter of this unexpected journey. The meeting on John Carter's farm was set to be a defining moment. The jet dealership's CEO and a team of executives arrived in sleek black SUVs, their tailored suits a sharp contrast to the earthy surroundings. John greeted them in his usual overalls, his handshake firm but his expression unreadable. The media wasn't invited, but John made sure the community was present. Friends, neighbors, and local activists lined the edges of the barnyard, silently bearing witness. The CEO began with a polished apology, his voice rehearsed and carefully measured. "Mr. Carter, we deeply regret the events that transpired at our dealership. What happened to you does not reflect our company's values." John listened without interrupting, his face calm but his eyes sharp. When the CEO finished, John took a step forward. "I appreciate your apology," he said, his tone steady. "But what happened to me isn't just about one bad day or one person's mistake. It's about a system that assumes people like me don't belong. Words won't fix that." The executives shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't expected John to call them out so directly. What can we do to make this right? The CEO asked, his professional mask slipping for a moment. John didn't hesitate. You can start by acknowledging the bias in your company and taking real steps to address it. That means training your staff, hiring more diverse employees, and creating an environment where everyone feels welcome. The CEO nodded, scribbling notes on a sleek notepad, but John wasn't done. And since this situation has already gone public, I think it's only fair you do all of this transparently. No more empty promises behind closed doors. There was a murmur of approval from the crowd. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they were being held to a higher standard than a simple PR campaign. And one more thing, John added, a faint smile creeping onto his face. If I'm going to buy a jet from you, I have some very specific customization requests. The CEO raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting this turn. Customizations? That's right, John said, his voice light but firm. I'll need a cabin large enough for my prize cow, Daisy, and a milking station installed. And if you can't make that happen, I'll take my business elsewhere. The crowd erupted into laughter and cheers. The executives, caught off guard, didn't know whether to laugh or protest. The CEO, sensing the humor but also the gravity of the moment, forced a smile. We'll look into it. The tension broke, but the message was clear. John wasn't going to let them off easy. As the meeting wrapped up, John walked the executives back to their SUVs. This isn't just about me, he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that lingered long after he spoke. This is about showing people that respect isn't something you earn by fitting in. It's something everyone deserves, no matter where they come from. The next day, the dealership issued a statement outlining their commitment to diversity and inclusion. They promised to implement bias training, increase representation in their hiring practices, and engage with community leaders to ensure their policies reflected their stated values. But John's request for a custom jet wasn't forgotten. It became the headline, sparking both amusement and admiration. Memes of Daisy in aviator sunglasses flooded the internet, and John found himself fielding calls from late-night talk shows and comedy networks. One producer pitched a reality series following John's journey from a humble farmer to an unlikely advocate for change. At first, John was skeptical. I'm not an entertainer, he told his wife, Clara, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. I'm just a farmer trying to do what's right. But maybe that's exactly why people are listening to you, Clara said gently. Because you're real. You're not doing this for attention, you're doing it because it matters. John thought about her words long after the sun had set, the stars stretching endlessly above the quiet fields. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe he could use this moment not just to tell his story but to amplify the voices of others who had been silenced or ignored. By the week's end, John had agreed to the show, but only on his terms. It wouldn't be about him. It would be about the people and communities who had faced the same struggles, about shining a light on the systemic issues that still needed to be addressed. And of course, it would feature Daisy. After all, she was now as much a symbol of resilience as he was. The announcement of the reality show sent shockwaves through the media. It wasn't just any show, it was a blend of humor, advocacy, and storytelling that captured the hearts of millions. Titled Flying High with John Carter, the series promised to explore John's journey as a farmer navigating fame, the aftermath of discrimination, and his ongoing fight for equality. The first episode opened with a montage of John's daily life on the farm. The camera lingered on the early morning dew glistening on the fields, the rhythmic clink of milk buckets, and the steady hum of a tractor. But it wasn't all serene. The show highlighted the hard work and grit it took to maintain the land that had been in John's family for generations. This is where it all started, John said to the camera, gesturing to the sprawling fields. My parents taught me to take pride in this land, to respect it, and work hard for what I have. They also taught me to stand up for myself, and for others, when something isn't right. The tone shifted as the episode delved into the jet dealership incident. The footage that had gone viral played again, this time interspersed with John's commentary. It wasn't the first time I'd been underestimated, he said, his voice calm but resolute. But it was the first time the whole world saw it happen. The show didn't shy away from the serious conversation sparked by the incident. Interviews with activists, scholars, and everyday people reflected a broad spectrum of perspectives. One professor explained the systemic nature of racism in industries like aviation, while a young black entrepreneur shared how the story inspired him to keep pushing forward despite similar challenges. But the show also leaned into humor, capturing John's wit and charm. A segment featured the jet dealership's engineers brainstorming how to install a custom milking station in the jet. "We've done custom wine cellars, gyms, even theaters," one of them said, scratching his head. "But a milking station? That's a first." John's neighbors and friends played a big role, too. Marcus, ever the joker, became a fan favorite with his playful teasing. "John, you know Daisy's gonna need her own pilot," he quipped during one scene. "You can't have her up there navigating turbulence on her own." As the series progressed, it became clear that Flying High with John Carter wasn't just about one man's journey. It was about creating a platform for broader change. Each episode highlighted stories from marginalized communities, showcasing their struggles and triumphs. From farmers fighting for fair land policies to students challenging discriminatory school practices, the show became a tapestry of voices demanding equality. One particularly powerful episode featured John visiting a school where students had started a diversity club inspired by his story. The kids, ranging from elementary to high school, shared how they were working to make their school a more inclusive place. "You showed us that one voice can make a difference," a young girl said, her eyes shining with determination. Back on the farm, life hadn't changed as much as one might think. John still woke up before sunrise, tended to his crops, and cared for his animals. But the visits from fans, media crews, and activists brought new energy to the once quiet fields. Clara managed it all with grace, becoming a beloved figure in her own right. Daisy, of course, became an icon. Fans sent her gifts, everything from custom collars to luxury brushes. Someone even sent a life-size portrait of her, which John hung in the barn with a bemused grin. "She's the real star of the show," he joked during one episode. As the season finale approached, anticipation reached a fever pitch. The dealership had kept their promise to diversify their staff and implement bias training, but the public was eager to see how they'd handle John's custom jet. The episode didn't disappoint. The reveal was a mix of hilarity and heart. The jet featured a sleek, state-of-the-art design, complete with a private cabin for Daisy, complete with soft hay bedding and a miniature chandelier. The engineers had even installed a small camera so John could check on her mid-flight. "I have to admit," John said, standing in front of the jet with Daisy by his side, "they went above and beyond. And while this jet is great, the real victory here is seeing a company own up to its mistakes and take steps toward real change." The camera panned to the dealership's CEO, who offered a few words about the importance of listening, learning, and growing. While his delivery was still corporate, there was a genuine undertone that hadn't been there before. The episode ended with John and Clara boarding the jet for its maiden voyage, Daisy comfortably settled in her cabin. As the jet soared into the sky, John's voiceover delivered the closing line. "This journey started with humiliation, but it turned into something bigger, a chance to prove that when we stand together, we can rise above anything." Flying High with John Carter didn't just entertain, it inspired. It showed that even in the face of prejudice and adversity, resilience, humor, and a commitment to change could transform a moment of pain into a movement for progress. The success of Flying High with John Carter had sparked a movement. Across the country, discussions about systemic discrimination, inclusion, and representation took on a fresh energy. What started as one man's story became a ripple effect of change, affecting industries and communities far beyond what anyone had anticipated. John, though, remained grounded. Despite the fame, he stuck to his roots, waking up at dawn to work the farm, hosting community gatherings, and mentoring young farmers of all backgrounds. His days were filled with visits from activists, educators, and leaders seeking advice or simply wanting to connect. One such visitor was Angela Mitchell, a young black pilot who had been following John's story closely. She arrived at the farm one morning, dressed in her uniform, her posture a mixture of confidence and nervousness. "I just wanted to thank you," she said as she shook John's hand. "Your story gave me the courage to speak up about the biases I've faced in the aviation industry." John invited her to sit and talk. As they shared stories, Angela revealed the challenges she'd faced: being overlooked for promotions, dealing with microaggressions from colleagues, and constantly feeling like she had to prove herself. "It's exhausting," she admitted. "But seeing what you've done makes me believe we can change things." The conversation left a deep impression on John. That night, he sat on the porch with Clara, reflecting on how far they'd come and how much further there was to go. "It's like we've opened a door," he said, staring out at the stars. "But now we have to make sure it stays open for everyone else." The next day, John announced a new initiative, the Carter Advocacy Fund. Its mission was simple but ambitious: provide resources, mentorship, and opportunities to underrepresented individuals in industries like aviation, agriculture, and beyond. The fund would offer scholarships, leadership programs, and support networks to empower those who had been historically excluded. The news spread quickly, garnering widespread support. Donations poured in, not just from corporations but from everyday people inspired by John's journey. The fund's launch event was held at the farm, bringing together a diverse crowd of supporters. Angela spoke at the event, sharing her story and urging others to join the fight for equality. John's speech was the highlight of the day. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's about all of us, working together to build a world where everyone has a chance to soar, no matter where they come from or what they look like." The initiative quickly gained traction. Within months, the fund had helped dozens of individuals pursue their dreams. One young man, a first-generation college student, shared how the scholarship he received allowed him to enroll in an aviation program. A woman who had faced discrimination in her agricultural business used the mentorship program to expand her operations and inspire others in her community. But the work wasn't without challenges. Critics questioned John's motives, accusing him of using his platform for self-promotion. Others doubted the fund's ability to make a meaningful impact. John faced these doubts with the same resilience he'd shown from the beginning. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said in an interview. "It happens one step at a time, one voice at a time, and we're just getting started." The backlash only strengthened John's resolve. He began traveling to speak at schools, conferences, and community events, sharing his story and advocating for systemic change. His speeches were a mix of humor, honesty, and inspiration, leaving audiences motivated to take action. One of the most powerful moments came during a conference on diversity in the aviation industry. John shared the stage with Angela, now a co-founder of the Carter Advocacy Fund. Together, they addressed an audience of industry leaders, urging them to confront their biases and commit to meaningful change. "We're not asking for special treatment," Angela said, her voice firm but passionate. "We're asking for the same opportunities and respect that should be a given for everyone." The conference ended with a standing ovation, but John and Angela knew their work was far from over. Back at the farm, they continued to brainstorm new ways to expand the fund's reach and impact. Meanwhile, Flying High with John Carter had entered its second season, focusing on the stories of individuals whose lives had been changed by the fund. Each episode highlighted a new voice, from a young girl who dreamed of becoming a pilot to an immigrant farmer building a new life for his family. The series struck a chord with viewers, blending humor and heart to shine a light on issues often overlooked. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a call to action, inspiring audiences to reflect on their own biases and take steps toward inclusivity. Despite his growing influence, John remained the same humble farmer he'd always been. He spent his evenings on the porch with Clara, watching the sun set over the fields. But now, those fields represented more than just his livelihood. They symbolized the legacy he was building for future generations. As the season finale of Flying High approached, anticipation grew. The final episode promised to reveal the next big step for the Carter Advocacy Fund, leaving fans eager to see what John would do next. But for John, the real reward wasn't in the accolades or the attention, It was in knowing that he was making a difference, one voice at a time. And as he looked out over the land that had been his family's for generations, he felt a quiet pride. Not just for what he had accomplished, but for the promise of what was still to come. As the momentum behind John's advocacy continued to grow, so did the challenges. Despite the progress, there were still hurdles to overcome. One of the biggest struggles came in the form of backlash from industry leaders who felt threatened by the changes John was championing. While some were quick to praise his efforts, others quietly worked behind the scenes to maintain the status quo. The negativity wasn't confined to corporate offices, it bled into the very communities John sought to uplift. Some local farmers criticized John for using his newfound fame to call attention to things that weren't really a problem. They believed his focus on diversity and inclusion was distracting from the actual work on the farm. John had never been one to shy away from confrontation, but these criticisms stung. He spent long hours talking with his neighbors, listening to their concerns and trying to help them see the broader vision. "This isn't just about farming," he explained in one particularly tense conversation. "It's about making sure the next generation has a place to thrive, no matter who they are or where they come from." Clara noticed the toll it was taking on him. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, she gently reminded him, "You can't change everyone's mind overnight, John. Some people are going to resist. But you can't let that stop you from doing what's right." Her words were a balm to his spirit, and the following week, John turned his focus back to the Carter Advocacy Fund. He saw it as his true calling, ensuring that his legacy wasn't just one of overcoming obstacles, but also one of lifting others as they climbed. But even within the fund, not everyone agreed on the best approach. Some advocates pushed for radical changes, while others felt the need for a more gradual approach. John, ever the unifier, worked hard to mediate these differing viewpoints, reminding everyone that the ultimate goal was to create an equitable world. "We don't have to agree on everything," he said in a meeting. "But we do have to agree that everyone deserves a fair shot." Despite the difficulties, the fund continued to flourish. More and more individuals were stepping into leadership roles in industries like agriculture, aviation, and education. One of the standout success stories was Jamal, a young man from a rural town who had used his scholarship to attend an agricultural university. Jamal had grown up facing the same kinds of discrimination John had, but he was determined to make a name for himself in the farming world. Jamal's story became a focal point of the latest season of Flying High with John Carter. The episode followed Jamal through his college journey, from his first day on campus to his internship at a large agricultural company. The show highlighted the ways in which the industry had, albeit slowly, started to change. "It's not perfect yet," Jamal said during an interview. "But it's better than it was, and that's because of people like John." Meanwhile, back at the farm, John and Clara continued to work together to balance the growth of the fund with their personal lives. Their bond, strengthened through adversity, became a symbol of resilience. As Clara often reminded him, the road to change was long, but they were walking it together. The farm, with its quiet routine, became a sanctuary of sorts. It was a place for reflection, where John could reconnect with the core values that had always driven him: hard work, honesty, and a commitment to justice. It was also a place where he could recharge, away from the demands of public life, and focus on the people who truly mattered, his family and his community. The Carter Advocacy Fund began to make significant strides in providing mentorship and internships to young people of color who had been historically excluded from agricultural industries. The first of its kind, the program offered hands-on experience, networking opportunities, and financial support to individuals looking to break into farming, aviation, and other sectors. But the most unexpected development came when a major agricultural company reached out to John, proposing a partnership with the Carter Advocacy Fund. They wanted to invest in creating a new pipeline for young people, particularly those from underprivileged backgrounds, to enter the farming industry. "We know we've failed in the past," the company's CEO admitted during a meeting. "But we want to be part of the solution, and we think your fund is the way forward." John didn't make this decision lightly. He had seen firsthand how companies often made promises without follow-through, so he insisted on accountability. "We won't settle for lip service," he told the CEO. "We'll be watching closely, and we need measurable results." The deal marked a significant turning point in John's journey. It wasn't just about changing one company, it was about creating a ripple effect that could potentially shift the entire industry. The partnership, built on transparency and mutual respect, became a model for other companies to follow. But even with the wins, John never lost sight of his ultimate goal: empowering others. Every week, he met with the recipients of the fund, offering guidance and advice. He spoke openly about the challenges he had faced and the lessons he had learned along the way. "It's not always going to be easy," he said in one of his mentorship sessions. "But if you keep pushing forward, you'll make it. And when you do, don't forget to reach back and pull someone else up with you." The Carter Advocacy Fund continued to grow, but John knew that true change wouldn't be measured by the number of donations or partnerships. It would be measured by the impact on individuals' lives. And as the seasons changed and the farm flourished, so did the seeds of progress he had planted. There were still obstacles to overcome, still voices to challenge, but with each passing day, John's belief in the power of unity and equality became stronger. His vision for the future was one where everyone had a seat at the table, no matter their background or circumstances. It was a vision that, thanks to his relentless pursuit of justice, was becoming a reality. As the Carter Advocacy Fund grew, John's influence reached new heights. Yet with success came an unforeseen pressure. Critics who once dismissed him as a mere viral sensation now found themselves forced to reckon with his impact. Some media outlets, previously skeptical, began to cover his work more seriously, but their tone was often condescending. They painted John as a flash in the pan, a man who had seized an opportunity and turned it into a media spectacle. John, however, refused to let these negative portrayals affect him. The first time he read an article that dismissed his efforts as a well-timed stunt, he didn't react publicly. Instead, he spent a quiet evening on the porch with Clara, reflecting on the bigger picture. "I can't control what people say," he told her. "But I can control what I do." Clara nodded. She had been by his side through every trial and triumph, and she knew that this was just another challenge in their journey. "Keep your focus on what matters," she reminded him. "The people who need help are looking to you. Don't let the noise drown that out." And so, John did what he always did when confronted with adversity: he got to work. He focused even more intently on the advocacy fund, ensuring that every dollar raised was put to good use. With Clara's help, he streamlined the scholarship programs, ensuring that more young people could benefit from the opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. One of the most significant developments came when the fund partnered with a network of small farms in rural areas, providing them with the resources and support needed to diversify their crops and expand their markets. John's farm, which had long been a symbol of resilience and hard work, became a model for these smaller operations. He made it clear that success didn't just belong to the large corporations, it belonged to the community as well. The partnership was a resounding success. Dozens of small farmers began to see their businesses grow, and John found himself at the center of a movement to change the way agriculture was perceived in America. But with every victory came a new set of challenges. Some of the more established farming groups, who had long held sway in agricultural policy, felt threatened by the shift in focus. They launched a campaign against the Carter Advocacy Fund, accusing John of trying to undermine the traditional farming industry. The accusations were baseless, but the attacks stung nonetheless. John didn't respond to the criticism right away. Instead, he focused on what he knew best: the work. He continued to mentor young farmers, helping them develop sustainable practices, and he used his platform to raise awareness about issues like food insecurity and the need for climate-conscious farming practices. Yet, the negative press continued to build. John was once again forced to confront the question: was he making a difference, or was he just a temporary distraction? One evening, after reading another critical article, John called an impromptu meeting with the leaders of the Carter Advocacy Fund. The room was filled with his closest allies, people who had supported his vision from the very beginning. I need to know something. John began, his voice calm but filled with intensity. Are we really making a difference? Are we just spinning our wheels, or is this actually changing things? The room fell silent. Each person understood the gravity of the question. After a long pause, Angela spoke up. John, what we're doing is bigger than any article or headline. Look at the lives we've changed. Look at the kids who are getting into agriculture programs, the farmers who are getting the support they need. That's what matters. Her words cut through the doubt that had been creeping in. John nodded slowly, a sense of peace settling over him. You're right, he said, his voice steadier now. We're not here for the headlines. We're here for the people. The meeting continued with a renewed sense of purpose. The group agreed that the next phase of the Advocacy Fund would focus on strengthening the community aspect, creating a network of support for young farmers and entrepreneurs who felt marginalized by the industry. They would also ramp up their outreach efforts, connecting with lawmakers and influencers to push for policy changes that would better support small farmers and sustainable practices. As the fund's influence grew, so did the support from other sectors. Environmental groups, civil rights organizations, and even celebrities began to lend their voices to the cause. John found himself speaking at national conferences, sharing the stage with experts and activists from a variety of fields. Despite his growing influence, John remained committed to his roots. He continued to spend long hours on the farm, working side by side with his family and local farmhands. The work was hard, but it kept him grounded. He would often joke that he was the hardest working man on the farm, even if his name was now known nationwide. But even as his public persona expanded, John never lost sight of the values that had driven him from the start: humility, empathy, and resilience. He knew that the road to real change was long and filled with obstacles, but he was more determined than ever to see it through. Then came a moment of clarity that solidified his path forward. One afternoon, John received a letter from a young girl named Maya, who had applied for one of the fund's scholarships. In her letter, Maya shared how John's story had inspired her to pursue a career in agriculture despite facing significant odds. You showed me that it's okay to be different, she wrote. You taught me that I have a place in this world, even when others try to tell me I don't. John sat down and reread the letter several times. It was a turning point. He realized that the true impact of his work wasn't measured by the number of donations or the headlines. It was in the lives he had touched, in the young people who now believed they had a chance to succeed. That night, as he and Clara sat together on the porch, John finally felt a sense of peace. He had done what he set out to do, not just challenge an industry, but create something lasting. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, John felt confident that the seeds he had planted would continue to grow, long after the headlines faded. As John entered the final phase of his journey, his focus remained steadfast. The adversity had only fueled his determination, and the progress he had made over the years was undeniable. The Carter Advocacy Fund was flourishing, yet the most important part of his mission was something far greater than numbers, partnerships, or media attention. It was about the lives he had impacted, and the movement he had ignited. The partnership with rural farms was proving to be one of the most transformative aspects of his work. Communities that had long been overlooked now had access to resources and mentorship that had previously been reserved for larger corporations. Young people, who had once believed their dreams were out of reach, were now seeing tangible opportunities for growth. As the fund expanded, so did the influence it had on the agriculture industry at large. But while his accomplishments were beginning to take root, not everyone was pleased with the changes John had ushered in. A faction of powerful figures in the agricultural and aviation sectors, who had long benefited from the status quo, began to rally against him. Their criticisms were loud and insistent, claiming that John's efforts were nothing more than a distraction from the real work of agriculture. Despite their vocal opposition, John remained unwavering in his belief that change was not only necessary, it was inevitable. The work he had started was not about personal gain, but about creating a legacy that would empower future generations to thrive. In one of his most poignant interviews yet, John was asked by a reporter how he dealt with the constant criticism. "I've faced adversity my entire life," he responded, his voice steady. "And I'll face it again tomorrow. But the difference now is that I'm not alone. The people who believe in this cause are standing beside me. And that gives me strength." The reporter pressed him further, asking whether he was concerned about the backlash from the industry elite. John paused, then answered, "You can't stop the tide. The winds of change are blowing, and they're only getting stronger. You either ride with it or get left behind." His words resonated deeply with his supporters. The message was clear: true progress would not come from appeasing those in power, but from challenging the systems that had been in place for generations. In the following months, John's efforts began to pay off in more ways than one. Laws advocating for more inclusive and sustainable agricultural practices gained momentum in local legislatures. The groundwork he had laid for policy changes was starting to take form, and he could see the beginnings of a cultural shift in the industry. One of the most powerful moments in his journey came when he was invited to speak at a national conference on sustainable farming practices. It was the culmination of years of hard work, and it provided John with a platform to call for systemic change. He used his speech to highlight the importance of diversity and inclusion within the agricultural community, calling on industry leaders to invest in marginalized communities and create pathways for underrepresented individuals to thrive. "I'm not asking for a handout," John said, his voice booming through the conference hall. "I'm asking for an equal opportunity. A chance to show that our people can thrive, just like everyone else. If we don't make space for everyone, we're missing out on some of the best minds this industry has to offer." The room erupted in applause, and many in the audience were visibly moved. John had made a powerful case not only for the importance of inclusion, but for the broader economic benefits of empowering marginalized groups. But even as he stood in front of thousands, delivering one of the most important speeches of his life, he never lost sight of the importance of mentorship. Throughout his entire journey, John had remained committed to teaching and guiding others. He spent hours each week working one-on-one with young farmers, offering advice and encouragement. He never saw himself as a leader on a pedestal, but as a mentor who was invested in the success of others. His work with Jamal, the young farmer who had benefited from the fund's scholarship program, was one example of this. Jamal had become a rising star in the industry, securing a high-profile job with a major agricultural company. But despite his success, he never forgot the lessons John had taught him. In a meeting one afternoon, Jamal turned to John and said, "I wouldn't be here without you. You taught me not just how to farm, but how to be a leader. You showed me how to stay grounded, even when the world is telling you that you don't belong." John smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about you, and the future you're building. You're the one who's making it happen." As Jamal went on to create his own mentorship program for young people of color in agriculture, John couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. The work was never going to be easy, but he had started something that was bigger than himself. His efforts were sparking a chain reaction, one that would continue long after he had passed on the torch. The final chapters of John's story were not about grandiose achievements or external recognition. They were about the quiet moments of impact, the young farmers who now had access to opportunities, the communities who were starting to embrace diversity and inclusion, and the cultural shift that was slowly taking root in an industry that had once seemed impenetrable. John knew that there was still much work to be done. The journey was far from over. But as he sat on his porch one evening, watching the sunset over the fields he had worked so hard to cultivate, he felt at peace. The seeds he had planted were growing, and the future, though uncertain, was filled with promise. In that moment, John realized that true leadership was not about commanding the spotlight. It was about inspiring others to step into it. His legacy would not be defined by the headlines, but by the lives he had touched and the change he had sparked. It was a legacy of empowerment, resilience, and above all, hope. The future was wide open, and John knew that the path ahead, though challenging, would be one worth walking. He had already made history. Now, He was setting the stage for the generations to come.